my parents were supportive, but they didn't fully get it. And so like I ended up kind of like distancing myself from other white folks, kind of going gravitating towards black people and folks of color. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, kind of like positioning yourself like, oh, I get it. I'm one of the good ones, right? That kind of thing, right? So I did harm, even as I learned a more honest frame on this country, I still
Yeah.
didn't understand myself.
Mm.
Right. And so that's why I
Yeah.
talk about it. I'm kind of writing in this memoir is like, really wasn't until my 30s, that I started to more understand like white privilege and whiteness and like some of the ways that I was behaving that was doing harm, and there's a lot of well-meaning racism as well, right?
Welcome to the Taking Out the Mask podcast. My name is Ashanti Branch, and I'm really glad you've joined us. Today's guest is Jason Biehl. Jason works in anti-racist work. I wanted to think about this podcast in a couple of ways because you're going to hear me get excited in some areas. You're going to hear me really thoughtful in other areas. But I want to tell you a story of why there's so many things that resonated in this podcast with me, with this conversation. I mean, we're going to talk on some topics. We're going to talk about slavery a little bit. We're going to talk about racism a little bit. We're going to talk about white men and black men and this intersection between all of our lives and this fabric that we're kind of connected to. And sometimes we may sense or feel like we're not connected. I'm going to tell you a story back when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. Maybe I was 7 or 8. I don't know. But I remember the year that Roots came out. Roots was a book written by Alex Haley, and it was adapted to TV on PBS. I remember KQED was showing it after school, and after school we would come home, and I remember the first couple of episodes. My mom, we would sit down after school. Like normally we have to do chores, but she was like, "We're gonna sit here and we're gonna watch this." And I was young. I remember seeing what was going on, and I had so many questions. I had so many questions as to why these people were in chains and why are they in a boat and why are they being whipped and why does he tell this boy named Kunta Kinte that his name has to be Toby and why is he beating him and why is he whipping him? And I had so many questions as a little kid watching these behaviors. I mean, I grew up in California. I grew up in a place where I'm free, right? I was never enslaved. My mom grew up in Arkansas, Little Rock. My mom witnessed behaviors that were horrible. My mom went to Central High School, one of the first schools that was integrated. I want you to know that my story could have stopped there in Little Rock, Arkansas, where my grandmother still lives. I think that the deeper part of this work, and we don't talk about my grandmother in this, we don't talk about my mom in this episode, but we do talk about, man, I was thankful to hear Jason talk about how he is trying to help other white folks, men, to understand their stories. I mean, I was confused when I was a little kid watching this and wondering, oh my goodness, why are these white people beating on these black people and no one's doing anything? Why are they not standing up? Why are they afraid? What's happening? What's going on? And as I became adult and I became more thoughtful and learned more history, and as I've seen the last few years of my life, recognize that there are people who are willing to believe that there was no big deal, that this didn't happen, that we shouldn't talk about it, that we shouldn't teach kids today of what has happened in this country because it's easier because we don't want them to feel bad about themselves. Well, that may be a topic for another episode. We don't go into the depth of that. And I have a lot of thoughts about that I'm resisting talking about right now. But what I am thankful for is that Jason has decided that he is going to spend his life to have a new understanding for people who look like him of what has not only happened in this country, but that we all have a role to play in how to make it better. If you were to watch the news, you would think that somehow these stories were hurting people because they learned about their history. Now, listen, imagine many of our families have stories and histories that we may not want to hear about. So would the answer be we don't learn about it because we don't want to hear about it? Or do we push ourselves to hear things we don't want to hear? I imagine you've seen many pictures and photos of lynchings, or maybe you've heard of there were photos. There were more than just photos of lynchings. There were postcards that the U.S. Postal Service would mail to other people's house. People would take pictures of themselves at lynchings, and they would send a card written about what they did on the weekend to their family members in other parts of the country. They were put in the postal mail. And there were people under these bodies hanging, posing for this behavior that we somehow in this country, people have decided that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to know about. Well, those people are the ancestors of someone. Those people taught their kids something. Those kids believed or didn't believe certain messages, and we all have a role to play in how we understand that these messages were passed down from generation to generation. Hate, evil, white supremacy. And so, man, all I want to say in this episode is that I am thankful for Jason in this conversation. I've met many good people in my life. I've met many good people of all backgrounds in my life, but there's something to say when your heart gets touched by a man who is willing to be at odds with his own community for those words that sometimes people don't want to hear. And so today, this conversation is personal, is meaningful, and I hope that the word spreads to more men, women, and people all over the world, definitely here in the United States, people who have decided to ignore a whole body of people, a whole history of people because of the discomfort. And so if you find yourself sensitive to topics about race, buckle up. These are conversations of men who get to take off our masks and talk about feelings and thoughts and life, and that we're not alone. If you have not yet made a mask, I'll say you can actually make your mask anonymously online. Jason and I share our masks publicly, but you can make your mask online at millionmask.org. And we just had our public launch here in Oakland. So the movement is growing, and I hope that if you haven't heard about it yet, that you will tell somebody about it, because I believe that this is how we're going to encourage and increase more love in our community, which is, I think, we all need. Thank you for being a part of this Taking Off the Mask podcast. Please enjoy today's episode. Jason, welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast. I'm so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashanti.
Well, we like our guests to introduce themselves first. So I'm going to leave it to you, Jason Biehl, to introduce yourself to the audience, what you want them to know about you, and then we'll jump into the mask.
Sounds great. I'm really thrilled to be here. Jason Biehl, he, him pronouns, born and raised in Washington, D.C. I'll say I have a history teaching background. Also, a turning point in my life, I'll just name, was switching majors from journalism to African-American studies at University of Wisconsin at age 19. And I feel like that was this moment of realizing that some of my elite prep school education, I went to an all-boys school, St. Albans, for 9 years here in D.C. And I had growing up in DC, which was then known as Chocolate City. I was curious about race. Obviously, I was, living a certain existence, but a little bit of a sheltered existence. And that some courses there really gave me the opportunity to delve into an exploration around, my own racial identity, kind of learn a more honest history and lens and critique, I would say, of this country and world. And ultimately, it came, I felt a little deceived by, that elite education. And so that was the impetus for that. Fast forward 25 years later, this is a long introduction. I
No, it's perfect.
Get
it's
right
perfect.
in, right?
No, you're perfect.
Perfect right in. And I just say that, been involved in a lot of different ways in anti-racism work with white folks and with white men, and grateful to Showing Up for Racial Justice. That organization did some work organizing a masculinity and whiteness reading group that evolved into an internal liberation healing space for white men, still going strong 5 years later. And just, I'll leave it at that. Former history teacher, and have a lot of, compassion and determination around these social justice issues, in this very moment. So.
Man, well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the work, and thank you for, I think there's a way that this work is so important, that we are having multiple voices in the fight for liberation, Yeah. And I think that oftentimes, if it can be seen like there's only no one else cares, right? Really, when you're in the work, you're like, does anybody else care? And to hear voices of men in the work that really care and that are willing to put their voice and their passion, privilege, platform, position, right? All those things. Sometimes you can say on the line, right? Because there's consequences in standing up against the power positions that exist, And so I thank you for that. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's an honor. And your film had a big impact on me, and some of this work with other men, and just seeing you in schools doing this work with youth. And, it's so important to really model a healthier, masculinity, and to give male identified folks like space to dig into our feelings, because we know that disconnection from our feelings is part of the harm and the harm that we inflict sometimes, so
that's right.
Yeah.
Is that severing from the head from the heart, right? It's like the road doesn't connect. And I think that's the work. I think, and as a teacher to teacher, I was a math teacher for 10 years. So I have a huge, I think that's probably what I don't know what I picked up. I picked up on just good energy, but also I love teachers. So first of all, thank you for being in that work and being, it's such an important work, and it's work that doesn't often get the respect I think it needs and deserves, So we get to make masks together. So it's not art. It's not art, but it is we get to draw something, and you already have your mask ready. Yeah,
I do.
Okay. And so as a guest, you get to decide who goes first. Either you want me to go first, or you want yourself to go first, and it's your choice as a guest.
I'm gonna defer, because
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right on. That's what we let the guests choose, because it's an important piece for that space creating, and so I wanted some more. I was gonna add some highlights. I bought this new colored pencil. I was gonna add some highlights to the image. I'm gonna just leave it. Something was telling me just leave it. Okay. So here's a mask I drew.
Okay. Wow.
I was thinking of this character, this wrestling character who has his mask on, but that's the character. And the words I drew on the front of my mask are, here we go: serious, hardworking, and caring.
Okay.
So in my best teacher writing, that's actually pretty messy. Serious, hardworking, and caring. And I think where this stands out to me the most right now is the one that stands out to me the most in this moment is serious has been taking charge, right? Sometimes when I started writing caring on the mask, when I think deep down, I care. Sometimes I feel like I care. I don't feel like I care too much, but my overly caring self gets hurt a lot. Because sometimes when you care so much for others, about others, I mean, I can't make it better for people. I can't make situations better for everyone who I care about. and I have to like be really mindful that I can care a lot, but if when it begins to impede on my own well-being and wellness, then it's becoming dangerous, right? But like, how much sleep do I lose for the young men who are struggling out there right now in my work? How much do I try and push a mom who is raising her 16-year-old like he's 6, and who is constantly mad at him because he's not 6 anymore, and you're like the constant like wanting to support all these pieces of the world that are struggling. And sometimes I'm like, I wonder how people turn it off. I mean, I wonder how people can see people hurting and just be like, oh, I don't, whatever, and ignore it. I don't know that reality. So sometimes I would never say I care too much, but I know that I have let caring go to the extreme where then I'm just kind of spinning in the spin cycle, you know? And so, I don't know. I'm actually talking about more stuff on the back than in the front, but the front, what I let people see is that I'm caring, serious, and hardworking. I'll stop there right there.
That all resonates. And I'll just say that feeling, I'll just say like connecting in space via Zoom during this pandemic, in these moments of devastation and just white supremacy, but also COVID and all the law. Yeah. Like, this country doesn't allow you to grieve, Yeah. And I'll just say that, like, I surprise people for like how much heart I have, and it's really like they don't expect to see me. And it's also like painful to have how you look potentially be the identity of the folks who on January 6th stormed the Capitol, right? Or the MAGA hats in DC. I saw a woman wrote a story about like seeing that in the African American Museum in DC and how painful that was. And like, so it's just to that. So I feel that I care deeply as well. And anyway, I don't know if that's front of my mask or I think that's the back for me. But should I start with my mask? Because I'm
Yeah, you start.
Just jump in. All right. So, and I kind of cheated. So, and I'm like, not that, man, I lost my craftiness a long time.
No, you didn't. Oh, do this. Cover up the back. Like maybe if you're willing to tear it out.
Yeah, tear it out. Okay.
And then just fold over the back so we don't see the back before you're ready to tell us about it.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so good. I'm glad we did this.
Right on.
Sorry, I needed to.
That was good. We wait for the reveal. We wait for the reveal,
That's
right?
Good. Okay. Yeah. And I sort of cheated in the like my 3 things because I was like trying to pick one word is hard. So I did playful humor.
Yeah.
I just think I got like witty, and it's like trying to bring that lightness, I think is so important to me. And sense of humor, it's one of the great parts of life is laughter, right?
That's right.
So there's that playfulness and humor. Outgoing, optimist, I feel like I'm just like social, and I'm also just like glass half full, just like presenting that to the world, like we can, do this and all that. And then steady, reliable too, right? Just sort of this like even keeledness, like gonna show up, gonna be on time, like have my shit together. I don't know if we can curse on here, but
it's all welcome. It's all welcome. It's all welcome.
Exactly. So yeah, I feel like there's something there too, where it's like, because, and I'm looking forward, obviously, and getting the back, because these are times where it's hard to have it all together. And it's hard to, how you doing? I'm okay. Right. And it's like getting that honesty with self and with others around, it's okay to not be okay. And like, even how we write emails and respond to emails, right? I hope this email finds you well. It's like, I'm not saying that anymore. Right. Like, it's like, no, like it's not honest,
Man, I'm glad you actually mentioned that segment. Thank you. There's I've been really presencing that part. Like when I send somebody a text and I'm like, I hope you're well, or like that. And it is the hope, but I think it almost like, I know when people send it to me, I'm like, oh, I can't really tell you that it sucks right now. Right. That means, right. Like Do I just blast your hope that your hope is actually way off because it's horrible right now? Like how do we make room for? And so I try and like keep it as the question. But even in the question, like, how are you doing? Here's what we hear from like a lot of folks in our work, right?
Right. I'm fine. Right.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
But knowing that inside that fine, there's so many other things that are going on, right?
Right.
That fine is just a great cover word, right?
Yeah.
It's a great cover word for like all the things. And in our work, we try and talk to young men around. Oh, they say fine. I'm like, oh, it's good. Tell me about what's fine. What's fine today?
Yeah.
They say they're good. Oh, tell me what's good today. Like,
Yeah.
oh, everything is great. Oh, tell me what's great today.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to name it so that you know that I'm really asking. So you're not just answering as a cover up answer, right? And if you don't want to get into it, you can just say, I don't want to get into it. I'm like, oh, I respect that too.
Yeah.
But not to say an answer that you know is not all the way accurate. But now, guess what? Also, people don't deserve to hear all your stuff. So maybe great is the answer that person needs to hear. But if it's somebody who I trusted more, who I knew more, I'll be willing to tell them, I'm hanging in here. It's a rough day, right?
Yeah. If you're coming home and you're telling your mom one word answers or whatever, like you said, then it's like, yeah, we're bottled up. We're not, and there is so much that's relevant there. And I'll just say, and it is important also to access joy. I mean, I had a friend who was talking about recently. It was like the men in the work, and things are so heavy. And he was like, heard a little, I think it was like Grateful Dead music or something in the park, or something. He just like did a little dance. It was just like just a brief thing, but it was like an unexpected like live music like in a park, and coming across that was like, it made him realize like, oh, that felt good, and I could like let loose and like be free. And I think that's so important because yeah, it just is.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the front. That's the front. Now we're gonna head to the back. Oh, the back. Oh my God. I paused on this one. Okay. Okay. Oh man. Okay, I got it. I finished the front and then I was like, what am I gonna write on the back? I try and like let the back be as much in the moment as possible. Okay, yeah, I feel that one right now. And okay, there we go. So man, so this is for people, for context, and for people out there, today is the November the 8th. So it's a big day in our country, here in the US. It's election day, midterms, and there's a lot of stuff at stake in so many places, in so many ways. And so the back is written with that in mind, that I'm worried. I feel a lot of heaviness, and I'm asking myself, what's next? I'm like wondering what's next. And I'm hoping for that. I'm hopeful, but I'm also like in some back of my mind since worry. But I think I'm the heaviness I want to speak to. I don't really want to speak to the political heaviness because I do have a lot of that. But I want to speak to this another heaviness that's really present for me right now. My brother, I have an older brother by father, and an older sister, and we didn't grow up together. I mean, we would see each other, on the weekends sometimes, but my father passed before I was born, so I never met my father. They met my father, I never did. But my brother, my grandmother passed recently, or January 2020. Feels like recent. I keep thinking about it, but I got a text from my sister yesterday that my brother, so some of my cousins decided to sell my grandmother's house. It's a disturbing situation, but so everyone had their hand out. Everybody was like trying to get their cut. My grandmother had the house since the 50s, right? And they sold her house, and like as soon as it was disturbing for me as the youngest. I'm the youngest grandson, so I think the heaviness is that my brother has now spent all of what he got, and now is looking for a place to live. I mean, it's been less than a year. less than a year to just like, and it bothers me. It's like, now where's he gonna go? Like he didn't make any good decisions. He didn't make a plan. He didn't. And so now he is trying to figure out where is he going to go live after he just squandered. And you just like, you hear about it all the time, right? People win the lottery and they win this and they just throw it all away, or they don't know how to manage it or whatever. So that's some heaviness that's, you know, as much as I'm worried about the big global world heaviness that's about to hit the, you know, whatever, I'm worried about like right here, my brother, who now is going to have to try and figure out where he's going to live, because he's basically threw all of his money away at the world. And that's disturbing. So that's a heaviness. And I think that's the one that's like, you know, really present right now. So I'm complete there.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. I appreciate you being so vulnerable around your family and yeah, and obviously the home that, you know, goes back so long in your family too. It's just like that's a lot, you know. That's hard.
Thank you, man.
It was coming up for me, and I crossed code. You just saying being present or whatever, and I crossed out on the back of my mask. I had angry, and then I realized, no, actually, I show people I'm angry. That's on the front. I wrote a piece a couple of days ago, and I was angry, right? And that's there. But what I don't necessarily show people is that I'm scared, and I'm scared. And I'm literally like, and to say that being like checking the boxes of so many points of dominant culture in this country, there's an awareness there on how privileged I am, how good I have it, family, you know, all the things. And still it's like where this country's at. And you know what, it's bigger than just country, but I'll just say scared, sad, grieving. You know, I just feel like always putting on, I feel like I have to be that upbeat, outgoing. And it's like in heart, it's like, it's been devastating, and we're not given time to and I've been in spaces where, I mean, the Monday after that, the horrific white supremacist shooting in Buffalo, I was in a space with a client and a Black woman, and she just named like, apologies if I have my camera off some, like I'm upset, I'm raggedy today, right? And it was like, I get it. And like it got really real really quickly. And that's why I'm like thankful to be in this work with such compassionate folks where there is so much resonance. But to be able to have to do it and to dig in to, you know, the session or whatever was planned, and to not be able to always do an impromptu in moments of like profound hurt is really hard. And then self-doubt. And I'll just say that like the scared piece, I'm gonna delve, because it's not just for this and the frustration where this country's at, all that, but it's also like personally, because just to be really frank, like I have a lot of love and compassion and value in this work. And everything that's happening in this country is in direct opposition to the work with white folks that I've been doing since 2017 and 2016, and trying to build and trying to heal and now it's like schools. I had a conversation with a woman in Maryland, like she told me 10% of our schools are still like committed to the ones who like started this like prior to the horrific murder of George Floyd. They've still got the support, they got the parent support. She's like 90% of our schools are have either paused or like gone in the other direction, right? And I'm just like, man, right? And so like that's what's got me scared and just like feeling some type of way, is it's like, it's not even just the vileness and everything of them. It's like the chills that it's sent through other, you know, the schools and the organizations, and just like how quickly, because in 2020, there was like, it felt like, oh, people are changing their missions. You know, it felt like this, and I knew it wasn't going to last forever. And here we are 2 years later, and it's like, it's just scary, because we have to do values aligned work, and we have to, I want to say we have to keep fighting, but there almost feels like something unhealthy in that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's too much, and to keep going. Like someone said that yesterday around the election, they were like, well, if black and brown people, like, they need to turn out more like than they did. And it's like, why do we, I'm just going to name it, like, why do we depend on black women to save this country, like, from itself? And black folks and brown folks. And it's like, why are the expectations for white folks to change on the floor? And like, that's the work that I'm a part of. And it's extremely painful to kind of devote my life to this and feel like it doesn't matter, right? And I know that it does. But that's a lot of what's coming up, just heaviness.
Man, thank you for that. First of all, thank you for the work. So we got a chance to, my young men in my program, we got a chance to go to Santa Cruz, and we got a chance to hear Wynton Marsalis, like he had created a symphony, and it was this big, the Cabrillo Festival, and it was amazing. And we got a chance to have a little one-on-one with him, with some of the young men. And I think one of the things he talked about that really stood out to me was that, there's always been this idea that, all white folks were not all in agreement with all the things that were happening in part of a lot of our country, right? When there were time when they were the ones who were in charge and the ones who were in power made all the decisions. But we think about the Underground Railroad, you think about those things. And I think that, the challenge is that the power is in charge always drowns out the voices of the dissenting voices.
Yes.
And I think that, you went to Wisconsin, so I've only been there once. I went to a wedding in Mosinee. So that's the only thing I know about Wisconsin is brandy old fashioned sweets. And I know Mosinee makes paper. You know what I mean? Right? That's the two things I know. I don't claim to know much more. But what I'm curious about, I mean, it's just like one question I think about is, how hard was that for you in Wisconsin to change your major?
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I'm glad that they had the major existed there. So that's a beautiful thing to know. But how hard was that with you with the circle? Or maybe you had a great circle of friends, but did you experience any pushback from people who were like, what are you doing? Like, because I think maybe the pressure is what causes most people not to stand up for those who are downtrodden, and stand up for those who maybe in their gut they feel they want to fight for, but they know the pressure of the counter narrative is so powerful.
Absolutely. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'll just say this was 1997. So it's like a whole different era. I mean, I'm younger than I look younger. I get that like compliments sometimes, but 46. And so it's also just like a different era. It was multiculturalism. It was, color blindness was like a virtue. Oh, I don't see race, right? All that stuff. I mean, that unfortunately, some of that stuff is still around. But I didn't know. Yeah, I feel like, and people like will say things like, oh, you want to be black, or like all this different stuff. And it was like, no, I was searching for the truth, right? I felt lied to, right? I felt angry that I was like, we get this American idyllic dream, story on a shining thing on a hill. And it's just a lie, right? And so, and Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom was something that unearthed that too. I couldn't believe I didn't know what apartheid was. Like, how did I go to this top school? We just weren't talking about things, to be honest with you. And it was also a time of like Martin versus Malcolm, right? The whole 90s and that framing, right? Very male movement centered too. And I actually read about it, where it's like my like Black Studies journey was very like male, like hetero, like influenced, until it wasn't, until I started getting into Black feminism, Toni Cade Bambara and Angela Davis and all these other folks. And so, but the short answer is I lived this like dual thing. I was changing on the inside. I was going to all these classes. I was learning. I was being filled. And I still had this like lily white social group, I partied with, go out with. Madison is like Madtown, we're Halloween and different things, going to football games, is putting a vodka bottle and a watermelon and, all kinds of stuff. Right. So it was just Yeah, I would. And to be honest with you, that there were, if I'm being really honest, and that's why we're here, I think as I got more, Brian Stevenson talks about proximity. And as I got more proximity to this injustice and system racism and all the things, I probably coped through drinking or, smoking some weed and things like that. It's because I didn't know how to deal with it all, and I felt overwhelmed by it all. And then there were years of like working nonprofit back in DC and doing some like white savioring, so it was like had to then unpack, like that's the other thing was like my parents were supportive, but they didn't fully get it. And so like I ended up kind of like distancing myself from other white folks, kind of gravitating towards Black people and folks of color. And like, kind of like positioning yourself like, oh, I get it, I'm one of the good ones, right? That kind of thing, right? So I did harm, even as I learned a more honest frame on this country, I still didn't understand myself. Right. And so that's why I talk about it. And I'm kind of writing in this memoir is like, it really wasn't until my 30s, that I started more understand like white privilege and whiteness and like some of the ways that I was behaving that was doing harm, and there's a lot of well-meaning racism as well. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, I appreciate it. There was a friend of mine in college, and I haven't talked to him forever, and I've been looking for him. He's on social media, or at least I haven't found him. And I remember two friends I'm thinking about. There was one brother who's no longer with us, Michael Kane. He's from Berkeley. And man, we would have some conversations like this. Like the first time he came up to me and we talked, and I found out he was from the Bay Area. If we're in San Luis Obispo, so it's like, mostly, 80% white, 75% white, 2% Black. It was like to find people who look like you was hard enough, but to find people who could connect with you who didn't even look like you was even rarer, right? But and to see him, this young white dude from Berkeley who had a heart for justice was almost. I grew up in Oakland, so there was in my high school there was only one white girl. Her name was April, like. Okay. Right, that was the only one, and it was like so. I didn't grow up with white people in my life, right? Only time you saw was on TV and on the news, right? But to go to Cal Poly and be like a sea of white faces who would to your face tell you that you didn't deserve to get in there. You got in here because of affirmative action, and I'm like, well, I don't know, but my acceptance letter didn't say anything about that. So if it was, good thing they kept it a secret, So I'm not sure how you found out, but I think even having to defend that, but to have this brother, one thing about Michael, who just had a big heart, like it was just like, wow, like where did like when you say where did you come from? It's like I know he wasn't like the only one, but it's like you speak about it and you're open to it, and I think we had a beautiful connection, a friendship, and I think I often wonder how people can stay asleep. Either they intentionally stay asleep to what's happening in the world around them, or they have trained themselves to like, don't acknowledge that you see it.
Right.
Don't acknowledge that you see it. And it's almost like, I don't know which one is worse, to just never be willing to explore past what someone told you should think about, or to be like, yeah, I noticed all of that, but I have to follow along when, along this path. And those are some things I think about.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's like white folks need to realize that something's been done to us, that we're raced, right? Like we're not actually white, right? Is the whole, like the Baldwin, right? On being white and other lies, right? We were Polish, we were German, we were Irish. We've lost that ethnicity. We've lost that culture, and our legacy's taken it from other folks, right? And we don't even so it's like, I still have work to do on exploring my own family and I've gotten into some spaces recent last year around like ancestral healing work. And I'm like, oh, what's that? And it's like, we actually have more ability to like research our people and find them. And yet we still don't do the work. Why is that, right? Because we're afraid of what we're going to find. And to your point, there have always been white abolitionists. There have always been folks as part of that struggle buried in there. There's a great book called A Promise and a Way of Life by Becky Thompson. I think it's ironic her name's Becky too. I'm just gonna say that. But anyway, it like chronicles like 39 like white anti-racist historians. And I never heard of these folks. And it's like, how come if I'm someone who's at this place in this work and I haven't heard of this book and I haven't heard of these folks, then that's a function of white supremacy too. That the resistors and the subversive, white folks who were really putting the body on the line, if we don't know about them, we need that. Because I was learning all about John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer and all, and completely inspired. Moved. And then, but I was like 40 years old before I was like, but I can't be them, right? I can't. That's not my lane. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do in the work is like shine a light on some of that whiteness and also that subversiveness to it. But I actually want to pose a question. I want to like move this with white men or like back to like some masculinity and patriarchy. Because like the group that we organize and like this healing group in DC, we work on healing, we work on education, we work on action. And I think the action is the third one that gets really tricky because it's like individually we do things, but then like trying to come together as a group of men to like do things. So I think, I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but it's kind of like in all this work that's so meaningful and grounded of these conversations that you're having, how do you know what the men are like? There's our own healing has impacts in our relationships. And I just worry about, because I've seen it with race, folks getting the likes and the clicks and the platforms. And it's like, are you showing up for women? Are you showing up for reproductive rights? Are you showing up for LGBTQ plus community? Like, how does this show and these conversations connect to that for you?
I mean, yeah, beautiful question. Let me make sure I understand the question. So the question is, how do these conversations add to the bigger picture of creating more like equality? Is that what
it's more like this is a space for like male identified folks to present their masks and to show what's beneath it. And there's like power in that vulnerability and that connectedness and like what we're doing right now. I feel it. And we're in this moment of like, and this may not be your work. This may be someone else's work. Like, what's the relationship between this work that we're doing and that you're doing and like solidarity with more marginalized folks?
Yeah, beautiful question. I think that what I saw when I first started the Ever Forward Club, which is 2004, as a first-year teacher, I saw smart young men, mostly I'm in the Bay Area, like brown and black young men who were smart, but were failing my class. And what I knew is that they would not have access to the bigger world out there if they did not first get an education, but also become independent thinkers of like how I act versus the way I really want to be acting. Like, there's one thing when you see a smart kid and you're like using that smarts to like outsmart you all the time. And another when you see a smart kid who's using that smarts to like prove to you how smart he's not.
Right.
And so what I think Ever Forward has tried to do in the beginning stages was, dude, I can see you're smart. I'm not sure who you're trying to hide it from. What are you doing? Like, what do you want out of your future in your life? Because the world is not designed. These are black and brown boys. The world is not designed for you to succeed. Right. There's plenty of room for you to succeed, but it's not designed that way because there's plenty of systems that are gaping holes in the sidewalk that will have you underneath the concrete jungle, as opposed to being a part of it. So what do you want? And I think that what I've done, so that's Ever Forward back 2004, and then you fast forward to these conversations. It's like, where do men get a space to be more human? Like
Yeah.
you've come to a place of understanding about your role in the world that I've met many smart men, white men, who don't even understand that they're not even willing to accept that they have privilege.
Right.
It almost baffles me sometimes to have to talk to a person who is like, yeah, no, I just worked hard and my family worked hard and we worked hard. And the reason that people don't have, because they don't work hard. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's okay. And you have to sometimes, and I want to have these conversations. I'm really curious. Is it a belief or is it a facade? And sometimes I think with the idea of the mask is like, I think we have more in common than we would ever know by looking at each other, even through this conversation, right?
Yeah.
But we would have never known that if I just passed you on the street, because what would happen on the street is that my eyes would see you, you would see me, and like maybe you would be like, let me start up a conversation, but maybe it would be like, oh, I don't have anything in common with this person, and we just keep moving. I know that's how I may operate. And so what happens is because we use our eyes to judge, we oftentimes miss the fact that there's so much more we have in common. I wish that every person had the space to like speak about where they, how they see the world. Like that man I told you about who couldn't see that he had privilege because he thought he worked hard. And I'm like, I'm not doubting you worked hard. This is not the question about did you work hard? The question is, do you see that even by working as hard as you worked, that if I worked the same as hard, that there were some doors that when I walk in, I will be looked at differently based on what they see on the outside, not about the content of anything inside here. And I think that sometimes you can say the smartest response to someone who believes those kind of thoughts, but if they're set in believing that, there's nothing you can say to move them. At least I haven't yet found the right velocity or amount of intelligence to counteract spoken ignorance that would be someone say, you know what, you're right, Ashanti. There, right? I mean, and I think I'm smart, but I think sometimes you don't want to be moved. You're willing to be stuck where your beliefs are. And so I think these conversations with men of all backgrounds, we've interviewed men from multiple countries and backgrounds, and we're all wearing masks, whether they're in India, Mexico, Nepal, whether they're in Australia, whether they're in Africa. We've all been trained as little kids, and it's intergenerational and So yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do is how can we break down the walls, right? To say that maybe everybody you meet who says something on the outside, there's more going on the inside, and maybe that will help us to begin having healthier conversations as opposed to like taking the words you say and saying you're such a blah blah blah. I'm like, oh, well, why do you feel that? let me dig a little deeper behind that belief,
I so appreciate that. And it's hard. I have to have so much patience. I mean, you have to have so much patience. We have to have so much patience in this work because it's like, I try and meet people with compassionate care. And it's like, I'm sorry, but it's disingenuous sometimes, right? It just, you can't not get, it's not that hard of a concept to get. And so there's such like repression and denial in there. It's like, I'm almost thinking about like just understanding exclusion, right? Just understanding like civil rights. I'm like, didn't you see folks marching and the children and the fire and then what, you think it's all gone now, right? Didn't you understand, watch baseball, you understand that there weren't any black players in the major leagues. You had, Jackie Robinson. You think that's all gone now? Or do you realize that like they're not interviewing, black manager candidates until they made a rule saying you have to interview minority, right? Like, right. So it's just like you're onto something in terms of this like cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Piece.
Yeah.
Because it's just you're too smart to not get it.
That's right. And I wonder even, we do workshops in schools that are like, like say all boys schools here in the Bay Area, right? That are primarily, all white students. And I'm really thankful to have done work with them and really like to have some healthy conversations around these masks. And I think that they're clear they have masks and they're clear they have blind spots.
Yeah.
And it's almost what I've seen. And sometimes it's easy to pretend that it is the way you see it because there's no one who challenges you on it. And if you only surround yourself with people who think like you think, I think there's this guy on the Today Show, I think Jordan Klepper, I think his name is, something like that. And he interviews these people at these rallies, and he asks them really just like, he's a white guy, so he gets into spaces that, other people can't get into. And he's like, hey, so tell me what your thoughts are about this. And he hears people answer with the most sincerity of their belief systems that you just be like, I mean, this is like 65-year-old people, 70, who have a belief system that you're like rooted in. Like, wait, did you just say this? And then they're like, yeah. And sometimes you even see them double take what they just said because they're like, well, but I'm wearing the shirt and I'm wearing the hat, so I can't change my position. Even though you find in some moments you see them catch on to the fact that they just said something that, that they don't even believe themselves. And I think that that's what my goal with most of these conversations are is, and I'm hey, sometimes I'm like, I'm looking forward to speaking to someone who believes in those words on this conversation, because I would be curious to just ask these not harder questions, but so tell me, where did it come from? Where did it start? Where did it start that this belief arose in your system, in your life? And anyway, so those are the ways that we try and do it. But I'm really thanking you for asking that question. And I'm thanking you for being here on the show, man. Thank you for this conversation. I think it's so huge and it's so important.
And I'll just say that I appreciate you naming where this all started as well, because I don't know if you know Omega Boys Club, Dr. Joseph Marshall, and all. Yeah. So I was part of that community for 7 years. I still consider them family. And that was a whole journey too, because I just started showing up Tuesday nights, whatever. It's like, who's this white guy? It's like literally think I had some sort of agenda building that trust. And it wasn't until I got up in front of that room and shared vulnerably about a little bit of my stuff that like some of that like ice broke and I got to really make real relationship. I think that's important to name, because there are these, like you said, we could walk past each other on the street, but I also saw things with like young Black men and not just men, and they work with girls as well.
Yeah.
It's where that path to, I mean, their whole thing's alive and free, right?
Yeah.
That path to college and that path to not being locked up in some environments is just, it broke my heart, right? How difficult it was. So for you to provide that space, for healing, just for being seen, right? So that's what I think too, is like, as a teacher and some of these things is like, when I subbed all around, San Francisco, South San Francisco, and like, and a lot of like continuation schools, which were like, kids had been like kicked out of one school and they were in the second. I was at downtown, I was at Baden, and it was like, and I think I chose that like for a reason, because it was like I wanted the challenge of like having to deal with my whiteness and my man like in real time with youth who've like been through a lot more than I had, right? And so I learned a ton from that. So I wanted to name that in the ways in which really my experience in the Bay and in some communities there really helped me in my own healing, and also in like bringing a lot of wisdom and patience and like graciousness now towards my work with white folks, right? No, it's anyway.
Well, I'm gonna tell me the name again. The book you talk about, The Promise of, I didn't forget the name.
A Promise and a Way of Life.
Promise by Becky Thomas, right?
It's dense. Becky Thompson, I think.
Thompson.
And there's another friend out in Oakland, Lynn Burnett. He started this white anti-racist ancestry project. So once again, he edited a website. He's trying to write about this and connect the dots. And I continue to build, network and because it's like we need each other, and that to that whole solidarity piece. That's what I've learned with white folks is like everybody wants us to be allies and co-conspirators and accomplices and all this, but if we're not showing up for each other, then how can we really show up across race and difference? So,
man, well, I hope that this is just the beginning of more conversations. I hope that if in your circle of men that you work with, if this simple little tool of one picture and 6 words can add richness to a conversation, I invite you to like Like, please, let's connect. And our goal is, we set a goal of collecting 1 million of these. We want people to use it. And we ask them just share the masks with us so that we can see masks that are made around the world. And I believe that the more we can begin seeing each other, that there's more going on than what I can see.
Yeah.
I think we create more space for the willingness to hear more than we can see. Right.
Yeah.
And willing to hear more than we think we heard. Because if every time somebody speaks, I try and jump on what they said, as opposed to being more curious about what they meant by what they said, then I easily can miss out on actually giving the room for the conversation to go longer. And I think that sometimes that happens in these communities that I am dedicated to being a part of improving and communicating better. So I would like to... I know you say you're doing some writing. I don't know if you have a place where we can follow your writing. So how would you like people to follow what you're up to and what you're doing? That would be great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Change the Narrative is the organization I started in 2017. So if you go to www.changethenarrative.me, there'll be links to my writing on there. I'm also working on a memoir. And I'll just say, with your work with men and boys and things like that, like, I really want to be working more with young people and white identifying, because that's my lane, at this intersection of race and gender and even class, because it's so needed. And I don't know, middle schools and high schools and stuff who are really doing this work. And obviously we've already named some of the defensiveness that white folks have around this work, but there's evidence of the need for the healing and the Lord. It's all around us, and the adults and the leadership in this country. So it's like, and I even talked, I'm fortunate to have gotten to know Paul Kivel a little bit, the mentor in Oakland. He's uprooting racism, all that. And I'm talking to him, was like, who's doing this work? And he's done a lot of it in the 90s and historically learned a ton from his work. And he's like, who's doing this work with boys at this intersection? He's like, it's such fertile ground. He's like, there's long been the question of who would invest in it. Right.
Yep.
And so that's what's so hard, is it's like, right. It's like, we have to invest in each other and build the community. And so let me know how I can support you.
Oh man.
Furthering this million mask movement. I know you got a big event on Friday. But it's in person, right?
It's in person. Yeah. But we're going to try and see what we can put up live. We're going to probably have some young men helping us with some streaming, and maybe we'll do some streaming at some pieces, and we'll send it out to the network.
That sounds great. Well,
thank you.
Keep in touch, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you, and thank you for this conversation. You bring in all the ways that maybe you didn't know that would be the case. It brings hope, because in the media platform stratosphere, and maybe the way I train my algorithm, I only hear from voices that don't sound like what we had this conversation about. And I wish more of people with this voice were finding the platforms that are broadcasting widely. But thank you, and I will broadcast it widely, and I will, in our following here, we need more a variety of voices that are feeling what they feel, and everyone has a right to feel what they feel. But I truly believe that this is what we need to be highlighting, and so thank you.
Thank you. Much love.
Right on. Much love to you too, brother. Man.
Yeah. All right.
Well, have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon. And let me just say thank you for being a part of the podcast. And it almost felt like it wasn't even a show. It was just, we're having a conversation. I think we need more of that, right? How can these conversations not have to be specialized in some kind of format, but that we have them in a way that's just heartfelt? So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.
You too.
The Taking Off the Mask podcast is produced by Ryan Louie. Graphics are by Kelly Wong. And a special thanks to the team at Ever Forward, Vanessa Cortez and Choque Allen Alvarez. We'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of the creation of this podcast as we cross the 100th episode milestone and begin the work to the next 100. We hope that everyone who's been a part knows that they're a part of the Taking Off the Mask family. and we look forward to you being a part of it as well. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, write a 5-star review, and share, as we look forward to continuing to have conversations that matter. Stay tuned for the relaunch of the Million Mask Movement on 11/11/22. That's November 11th of 2022. There's a math problem in there. You can find out more by visiting everforwardclub.org and following us on social media. Take care, and we'll see you soon.